Alright, we are recording for Chapter 3 of Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. Um, this is an interesting chapter. It includes the full dinner scene between the crew and the Klingons. We also do get background information on Valeris before that, and some background information that's actually kind of important. Well, we get some setup information that's important because people consider it a goof. At least according to the book, it's not. Later on, I'll get to it when we get there. We also get some more. Yeah, there's quite a bit that goes on. So you start off with this. We're following Uhura for the time being. Kirk, McCoy, and Scott were officially retiring. So was Spock, who, though his Vulcan blood caused him to age far more slowly, was leaving out of loyalty to the captain Uhura felt. There is more to this highlight, but it's like, yeah, that makes sense. I could see that with Spock. That's like, he is my friend, he is my captain. If I'm not serving him, I'll go do other things. I get that. Although to be fair, I could also see him just going to the academy and teaching, just like doing that exclusively. But maybe that's also something he can do while retired. Anyhow. Chekhov planned to transfer off Enterprise and was toying with the notion of leaving the fleet, capital F. So leaving Starfleet as a whole. As for Uhura, she planned to go back to teaching at the academy to give back some of what she had gotten out of Starfleet. And that and some of the other stuff, it is funny. It is kind of funny that Uhura was not one of the more prominent characters in the original series. And in a way, not even all that prominent in some of the movies either, but I'm trying to remember which one was it, where I started talking about Nichelle Nichols just carried Uhura so well. That carried the character, carried herself in that character so well. I always would think of her as intelligent. And I'm just... Which one was it? One of the novelizations I started to... Oh yeah, I know in Voyage Home, I think also earlier, talking about how she seemed like somebody who would... Uhura seemed like somebody who would be interested in cultures, that her level of intelligence is likely at least equal to Kirk's. But she's not a warrior. She's into communications. She does communications, but she knows cultures. She just knows all that. And that is her passion. It's like very much that. And that continues to come through here. And it is kind of funny because we're getting more of the actual evidence of it in the novelizations. But as I said, she's not the most prominent character in the original series. She's not the most prominent character in any of the movies. Yet somehow the image that formed in my mind for Uhura's character is what is still presented in these novelizations. So it's also off of that and some of what will be coming. Obviously, she would want to go to the academy and want to try to share what she had gained as well, wanting to give back some of what she had gotten. It's like, yes, that is exactly her character. And just, I don't know, it is just, I guess a good way to put it is that speaks to how effective Nichelle Nichols portrayed the character, that something like that would come through, even though I said not the most prominent of characters. We also get this that was also showing her intelligence. Uhura was enough of a skeptic to realize that the attacks, referring to Kudau and Themis, actually it makes reference to there being others as well, minor ones, so Kudau and Themis were just... Well, Kudau was the most significant. Themis technically was a small attack. There weren't that many people on the planet, so it would be like the others. It's just the most recent, but it would be like those others where they were minor. The attacks probably weren't officially sanctioned and had been committed by a small faction within the military, but the Klingon government would do nothing to stop them. The Klingons would sit back and let the Federation be provoked to the point of war, while they wooed the Romulans and debated among themselves whether they possessed sufficient weaponry to emerge as victors. And that is an intelligent interpretation of what would be going on. I will acknowledge, though, that's also what my interpretation was. I think I gave that a chapter 2 ago. Because it makes sense. The whole proxy war thing, that is a way to gauge an enemy without having to worry about your own commitment being too serious, too significant. But you still have to do it very carefully. But still, it's she is reading that, and it's not everyone is going to think that way. It is kind of sad, and there is actually a line later that I might forget to reference back to what I'm talking about here, but is also like that. That it is easy for some people to forget how intelligent true leaders must be. So yeah, but when we get to that, I'll explain what I mean at that time. So Chekhov and she are talking, and we get these things. And Chekhov is not saying he's pro-war, but he's definitely he does have a hatred and anger towards the Klingons. Uhura is at least trying to control herself. That it's while she understands all the anger and hatred, she wants peace. She is committing herself to peace. Chekhov hasn't necessarily made that commitment, and so is indulging his anger. Is how I describe it overall, but we get this. Do you still want to have a pleasant dinner with the Klingons and pretend like everything is all right? This is after... Chekhov overheard McCoy talking about Carol's condition, and he is now he has just shared that with Uhura. So now it's like, you still feel that way? Uhura shook her head. No, but I will, as far as pretending like everything is all right at the dinner. She lifted her face toward him. Don't you see, Pavel? These Klingons want peace. They want to stop the killing. His lips thinned to a grim line. Do they? I don't trust them. I don't want to myself, but what other choice do we have? Chekhov did not answer, but the look in his eyes, which said that he might actually consider that second unspeakable option, frightened her. So, yeah, I mean, and there's a fair amount in this chapter prior to the dinner of the crew, not just the officers that we know and love, but other people having that hatred for the Klingons and actually saying it, somehow giving voice to it. We get this line in here where we've now cut to Kirk, who's waiting in the transporter room for the Klingons to be aboard. Could this have been what the Organians intended all along? Kirk wondered. Were they remaining silent in order to prod both parties into seeking a peace voluntarily? A peace that would not be threatened the instant the galactic referees were out of the picture. I'll be honest, that's annoying me. It's kind of like in the Final Frontier videos. I didn't put into the review. I don't think I did. I thought about it, but I decided, that's minor enough. The constant referencing to the weapons that the settlers were using as being crude and being handmade. It's like, we get it. You only need to tell us that once. You don't need to keep repeating it. Or like Claw's gunnery rig being custom made. It's constantly referred to as that. It's like, we don't need that. You can say that once and then move on. So it is annoying me the amount of times we're getting the Organians mentioned here. Because, I mean, this is already just chapter 3, and I feel like we've had them mentioned more than once a chapter on average. And I get that there is the problem of how can any of this be happening with the Organian peace treaty in effect and being enforced by them? I get that that's a question. You can just say, we don't know what they've disappeared. We don't know what's up with that, and then move on. The only way I will ultimately be okay with them constantly bringing up the Organians is if we get an answer. If we get an answer, cool. I'm fine with that then. You're keeping us... You keep reminding us of it so we get that payoff. If we don't get the payoff, I'm going to be annoyed. So as they are beamed aboard, we get the descriptions of each, and this is part of what it is for Chang. It's not the physical. The physical description was before this. I like this one, though. Yet he emanated a fierce, cruel cunning that made the captain's blood run cold. He had heard of Chang the Merciless, who had ordered the death of thousands, killed countless times with his own hands. Part of the reason why I had to highlight that was just, with Chang the Merciless, I immediately thought of Flash Gordon. Which was Kang the... Hang on, I actually put it in here. Kang the Cruel, who was son of Ming the Merciless. And just the moment I read that, I'm just thinking, could they have wanted Max von Sydow, who played Ming in the Flash Gordon movie, for Chang? And it's like, in certain ways, I could see him in the role, but no. Christopher Plummer plays Chang so perfectly. It just no. It's Max von Sydow, great actor. Don't get me wrong, but Christopher Plummer played it so perfectly. It's not Max von Sydow's role. Just it's not. Yeah, but yeah, it's still. I'm just thinking about that, and I wonder if the name may have in part, Chang the Merciless may have in part come from Flash Gordon, which is entirely appropriate, by the way. Okay, we get this line, which, yes, it is in the movie, with Book and Samno. This is after the Klingons have left and Valeos fuses. They all look alike, Brooke said with a wink to his companion. Now, to be clear, he is saying this as an insult. But there's also in reality that does actually happen. She was Chinese, I knew her in college. And she did at one point share that, yeah, when she got off the plane here, we all looked alike to her. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's a real thing because the different races, we do have different physical features on our faces, especially. Such that if you don't know what cues to look for, and it's all subconscious, at least it's largely subconscious, if you don't know those cues to look for, it is going to be harder to discern between us. So it's like the effect itself is not racist. What Burke is saying here, I want to make sure it was Burke and not Sam now. No, he's saying it absolutely is a racist, but it is a real thing. And I'll just add also with because this is something that a lot of, well, it depends on who you grew up around, who you know, but I know that for me, because I don't have a lot of Oriental people, whether they're Chinese, Korean, or Japanese, and I've known all three in college. Only one was Japanese. It was mainly Chinese and Korean that I knew. But for some of them, like, and they did this where they asked me, how old do you think we are? And it was just a little game. For all of them, I was off by 10 years. Because, again, it's the facial cues for age and such. I don't know them. And so I was thinking they were about 10 years younger than they actually were. It's like, yeah, but it is. Now, if they would look at each other, they would know. Because they know what those cues are. I don't. But yeah, no, he was definitely being racist. And there's another line later. I don't remember if I highlighted it or not. That is a bit more clear on that. We do also get a little bit of Savick in here in a way, because they also talk about, what about, well, because Valeos hears this and is like, I mean, yes, there is generally that high domed forehead with prominent bony ridges and the typical light bronze to dark brown skin coloration, but other than that, it's like really quite different. Yeah, it's like she could think of several characteristics that distinguish each from the other. Then when Sam Noah also brings up, what about that smell? And only the top line models can even talk. And with this, again, she's actually thinking about it. It's like, I wonder if I'd be able to tell about this odor thing, but I'm not human, so maybe I can't. I mean, it's like how she is just processing it literally, and it's like, yeah, that's very much how they were presenting Savick in Wrath of Khan, which I'm good with that. I don't have any complaint, any issue with that. But it is still a little funny, I think. Just to see it repeated here. And to be clear, she is aware that this is insulting. So she doesn't condone it. She is annoyed by it, but she still thinks through it literally. Because it is like only top line models can talk thing. Yeah, a fact Vulcans had good reason to find privately amusing. The idea that Klingons are stupid. Humans could hardly be considered the galaxy's scholars themselves, but Vulcans were far too polite to mention in public. It's like, I mean, it's a different kind of intelligence, and I think technically with some of the stuff that's set up in other things, I'm not sure how much is in Enterprise, how much of it I'm basing off of Enterprise. Even if you'd want to have the Vulcans claiming that, oh, well, we're so much more intelligent than you humans, it's also like, yeah, but aren't you like isn't your species like 5 times older than we are, and yet we're at technological parity? What do you mean? It's like, we're actually a lot faster at this stuff than you are. I mean, it is. I think that is actually part of the chronology of the two species. Vulcans are an older species, but they're at best equal to humans. So yeah, it is just kind of funny that. We finally get the explanation of Valeris's name and why she was not raised Vulcan. Valeris's parents had volunteered to try to establish negotiations with the Klingons. They grew up on a planet bordering Klingon space. Well, she grew up on a planet bordering Klingon space 7 months prior to the events of Errand of Mercy. It seemed that war was inevitable, and they tried to do something. So, her mother, T'Pol, a devout pacifist but scarcely a traditionalist, had named her newborn daughter Valeris after one of the honored female heroes of the Klingon race, a warrior. The name could also be construed as having Vulcan roots, a variant of the word for serenity or inward peace, as well as being related to the English word valor. The Vulcan child, then, was to be a courageous warrior for peace, or so she had been told by others who remembered her mother before she died, and her father before he changed. So... Okay. They tried to reach out to the Klingons to negotiate, and the response was to kill her mother, and her father basically broke at that point. He decided that in this instance, the great Vulcan philosopher Surak was wrong, that peace and the Klingon race was incompatible. Cecil, father's name, published a treatise arguing that the use of force was justified in certain situations, especially against Klingons. His arguments horrified his peers, so he ended up being ostracized, which meant she was as well. But also, her father was so devastated by the loss of his wife and by this that he became a recluse. So Valeris was actually raised then by an attendant in the home who was human. So, and eventually her father, the plan got attacked. They were rescued. All 3 of them, the human attendant as well, but while she survived her wounds, despite the fact that her father wasn't wounded at all, he did not survive. Eventually was committed and died shortly thereafter. Did make a mention of... an autopsy revealed long-term degenerative brain disease. I'm curious if that's going to be brought up later, because when I read that, I was thinking, is this to suggest something like... by his not that his thoughts are either the result of the brain disease or that the brain disease is the result of his thoughts. Like the lack of logic, could that have actually been leading to a degenerative issue? I don't know. That could be interesting to see explored here. It might not be, but it is an interesting concept. Just trying to remember if there was... Yeah, kind of a little bit that I wanted to mention there with the whole... that Surak and saying that peace, that pacifism is what you all need to do, and challenging that. It is illogical to believe that you shouldn't be willing to challenge any of your principles like that. You should challenge them. Indeed, if you do not, do you even have them? I mean, because there was an argument that if you are unwilling to challenge a principle, then that might mean that you, in fact, are very cowardly with it, or that it is, in fact, a very weak principle, that it cannot stand up to such a challenge. And it does sound like they didn't be like, okay, well, here's why you're wrong. They didn't do that. Just can't possibly do that. Shut up. Go away now. And there is also an argument that, yeah, sometimes war is necessary. It's sad, but that is true. And it does also make you wonder a little bit with the Vulcans, or at least makes me wonder a little bit about, would that species survive if not for the Federation protecting it? I mean, when you have a group that is absolute pacifist, that then does mean that it technically only takes one evil actor, one person desiring violence against them to exterminate them, because if they're completely pacifist, they will not be capable of doing anything to protect themselves. I'm not sure. I'm only aware of the Jains on Earth that are also total pacifists, but even then, it's varying within them, within that culture. So I don't know actually if there have been efforts to try to exterminate them ever, or if they've always been protected by those around them. I don't know. And also, as said, that there are different levels of adherence to some of their tenets. So, for example, one thing. So, okay, to be clear, Jains are. They believe in total pacifism, including that you should never do anything that even harms somebody else. Now, one issue with that is if you become a surgeon. Because technically, all surgery by its nature does harm a patient, but it is to help the patient ultimately. So, how do you reconcile that? Well, some of them have by just accepting the whole, well, yes, we are harming you by making the incision, but the result is to heal you. It is to make you better. And so it is justified, they're good with it. So it is one of the things where, yes, there is nuance there. It is interesting that the Vulcans seemingly do not. And I do wonder a little bit about that. That is an interesting concept to see more explored. And maybe we will in this, as far as Valeris's own views. Now, true, she's a newcomer still, in some ways, to Vulcan philosophy. So it will be interesting to see how some of that works out. How we get explanation for her own, why she became or becomes a conspirator, and that I will get to with this next highlight. You men have work, Valeris interrupted, wondering whether the coldness she felt was audible in her tone. No matter. Her duty required her to work with these men, Samno and Burke. She would do so logically and efficiently, but that did not mean she had to like them. Yes, sir, Burke answered, standing to attention. Samno struggled to follow suit, then snapped to it, Valeris told them, and wondered as she watched them go whether adequate precautions had been taken to ensure the Klingons' safety aboard the Enterprise. Now, from the movie, we know that Valeris, Samno, and Burke are all conspirators. That specifically Samno and Burke are the two that beam aboard Kronos 1 to go and assassinate Gorkon. Or at least that is what is heavily implied in the movie. Potentially they were killed as dummies, but anyway. We don't get the subtle suggestion here. We don't get even a subtle suggestion here that they are conspirators yet. So I do wonder if there might be something that leads to that they are not yet conspirators, that something turns them during the course of this book, or if it's something else. I mean, it could also be technically that she doesn't know that they are conspirators. That her purpose there is something else. Their purpose is something else, that they don't actually know each other, but that ultimately she will be told she has to kill them to prevent them from exposing themselves. So yeah, I don't know. But I am very curious about that. So, and also going back a bit with the whole her father thing, to put it more directly, it would be interesting to see if there was ever somebody writing up and doing it effectively, Vulcans trying to understand the concept of just war theory. That could be interesting, but anyhow. So the Klingons are on board, and Kirk has been showing them around, giving them a tour, and this does include a research laboratory. Who Gorkon just said it's most impressive. The captain nodded. Starfleet's been charting and cataloging planetary atmospheres. All vessels are equipped with analytical sensors. It was scarcely classified information. Kirk did not doubt the Klingons were well aware of the sensor and weapons capabilities of all Federation ships, with the exception perhaps of Excelsior. So this is interesting for a couple things. One is, people do consider it a flaw in the movie, a goof in the movie, that the Enterprise has technology for finding and tracking gaseous anomalies. They use this for making a torpedo later. But it's the Excelsior that's actually talked about doing a survey, although earlier it was also said in this that was a geophysical survey, not atmosphere survey. But in any case, yeah, this is saying, no, it's all Starfleet ships that have this stuff because they're just doing this. So yeah, and it's I never really considered that a bit an issue with the movie, because it's also like, why couldn't they just also have the equipment? That does also help explain one other thing, because there have been mentions to this, they're not on their normal mission. There was no indication they were on a mission to begin with. So yeah, there is that, but it's still, we get that. There's also the whole, with the exception perhaps of Excelsior, it's been a freaking decade, man. How is that still the latest and greatest? If nothing else, there should be other ships of the Excelsior class by now. If this were closer to the events of the other movies, wouldn't be a problem. Because, like, well, you know, they're still figuring out what the Excelsior is good at, what kind of improvements we can make, all that. That would be fine. I'd be happy with that. But it's been a decade. It's been established that. So, yeah, I have an issue with that. I think that there should be continued work here, that there should be other ships also being developed that would be more advanced than the Excelsior, or just other ships of the class that would inherently be more advanced just because they were made more recently. So they benefit from things Excelsior has already figured out. I don't remember the name of the episode, but it's the second one that has an actress playing one of the engineers that designed the Enterprise D. The first one, Geordi's working with her as a hologram. This is the second one where she's actually in person on the ship. But at one point, she's looking at the dilithium matrix and notes that this configuration is off. And he's like, yeah, we did this to it. And she's like, we were planning on doing that in the next series of ships. It's like, yeah, well, we had... There was a bad situation. There was an emergency situation. So I implemented that here because we needed the extra efficiency. And it works. It's like, you would be seeing stuff like that, where the existing ships would have modifications done like that on them. Not in emergency situations, but in general. And it's like, oh, good, those work. Now we're going to integrate them more fully into the new ship that's old class, but we're just improving it. So it's one of those things that science fiction is supposed to be detailed, is supposed to be technical. So this technical complaint I have here is valid to have. I know it sounds unnecessary, but it is valid to have. I mean, you know, that's a lousy example, but I'll still give it because I let myself be distracted with it. I make mention in A Letter from Catherine when Roman is on board a specific ship there that, like, the outer hull design is consistent across multiple ships, but the inner configuration differs. And when he's on it, he actually has to start thinking about, okay, what would this be? Because it's like, there were variations of it, where it's like, yeah, maybe you would have a different layout of rooms and such for different purposes. Yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think I may have described in there that you still had, like, central key corridors and also like stairwells and such, that those would be consistent, because those would be too much like center, they'd be too critical to the ship to vary those, really. But you could see other configurations because, hey, you need other configurations. Alright, but still, come back to this this moment in the story. So Kirk has been showing around Gorkin and his crew, his party, and has been impressed. The Chancellor was the antithesis of every Klingon Kirk had met. Sincere, gracious, well-educated in the ways of humans, possessed of a charismatic warmth. Even Chekhov, who had joined the group at Gorkin's insistence after a chance encounter in the corridor, was smiling, put at ease by the Chancellor's attempts to tell Federation jokes. Gorkin seemed devoted to the notion of peace between his empire and the Federation, spoke as if he had been waiting for an instance such as Praxis in order to avert war. Was it all a skillful act? After all, this was a man, a Klingon, Kirk corrected himself, who listen to General Chang's advice. This is the thing that I was referring to earlier, that a challenge for great leaders, like certainly when writing them or putting them in movies, is Gorkin needs to be that man that was just described there. This warm, very intelligent, sincere, gracious man. But at the same time, yes, he does need to be capable of ordering the massacre on Kudau. And he needs to be able to do this and then like immediately turn, give the order, and come back. That's what he needs to be able to do. And that's not to say that all leaders need that capability, but a great leader, does need that. And it's actually kind of funny. I recently got a copy of Lawrence of Arabia and cut out one line. Well, technically it's more than one line, but part of a scene from it that is kind. I did that earlier today, and it's just funny because it is exactly what I'm talking about here. So maybe I'm a little primed for it, but still. It's at the end where basically you've got Prince Faisal and the general, I can never remember the general's name, who they have dismissed Lawrence because he's unneeded anymore. He served his purpose. And so as the general's concerned, that's it. I don't want you around anymore because you have too much power. I need to be in control. You're a threat to that. You're dismissed. And it's like, this is clear that he is treating Lawrence poorly in that way. But then Faisal goes one better, because he's not only also dismissive of Lawrence, who he does have great respect for, and he knows the value of Lawrence, as far as, what he has achieved. But he also pulls out the newspapers and is showing them about how it's great what Lawrence has achieved for us here, is showing that, and he's basically saying that he's a pawn. I can make use of this as well. And the general just leans back and was like, I thought I was a hard man. And Faisal just goes, you are a general. I must be a king. And it's just like this, you do not understand the level I have to play at. And that's who Gorkon has to be here as well. He needs to be at a much higher level than Chang is. That, yes, he is listening to Chang, but Chang has the luxury of just being a general, of just being the guy in charge of the military. Actually, he's chief of staff, so he's not necessarily in charge of the military. But still, he has the luxury of that. He just needs to fight and win wars. Gorkin needs to know when to start a war, when to end a war, potentially also how to fight the war, everything about the economy, how to support, nurture, maintain his culture. He needs to do all of that. So, yeah, that can be something that makes writing some of these guys very difficult. Because you can't, they need to seem perfect. They shouldn't be perfect, but they need to have an answer for everything, essentially. There needs to never be a question that they cannot respond to. Now, it might be that they fall back to some principle for them. Where it's like, I don't have a specific educated answer for this, but I can fall back to what I know and believe and just work off that because I don't have enough knowledge to give you something straightforward. He can do that. Chang, not really, but he's also not going to be asked those questions. So it's like, yeah, it's Gorkin, absolutely, he is both that man that Kirk is getting to know and admire here and respect here, and he should also be capable of being at least as bloodthirsty as Chang. And that is part of what would make him so good. And also, I will acknowledge, I am also reading into it a little bit and putting some on there because I reject the notion that was given earlier in the book that Gorkin is of this new group of Klingons that desire peace, not war. It's like, no, he should still be a warrior and should be impressive in that way. All the Klingons should be, but he is one who, because he operates on this level, does also see the value of peace. So anyway, Kirk is then like, want to go topside? And Chang is like, yes, I'd love to. Topside referring to the bridge. And Chekhov is like, Captain, are you sure we should? Yes, I'm sure. They get onto the turbo lift, and as the doors close, Kirk hears something. He's not sure if he heard it. And unfortunately, the Klingons did hear it, but don't mention until later. Yes, but would you want to drink from the same glass? Unlike the they all look alike line, no, that is pure just racial animus. That's pure racism. Because they all look alike. It's like technically there can be reasoning behind it. It was said as as a racist insult. It was a racist insult then, but technically it's not always. Putting it another way, the Klingons could just as easily say it about the humans. And it's like, but not with a racial connotation, just a, I don't know what I'm looking for here. Like, one thing that I think is established later, like in TNG, is that the forehead ridges of Klingons are all unique. So it could be that they don't necessarily, as far as a facial cue to help them differentiate between each other, might be that while we may look at like eyes, cheekbones, nose, and jawline, they might be looking mostly at the forehead ridges, which we don't have. So if they were to see two people that have similar foreheads, but everything else is different, they might be like, wait, I thought you were them, or are you two related? It's like, no. So it's like, that is an example of a kind of cue that if you aren't used to seeing, you're not going to be able to tell them apart. And I do feel like it might be the case throughout TNG, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager that all the ridges are actually different. I'm not certain, but I hope that they did actually try to do that to keep them all unique. They probably would have to, though, just because the actors' underlying skulls would be of different shapes. Only the motion picture do I know I've noticed that the forehead ridges seem to be identical. It's a very short scene, but it does look like all of them have basically identical makeup. Anyway, so now we get into the dinner, and we do get the, Captain Spock, you've not experienced Shakespeare until you've read in the original Klingon. I love that line. I love it not only because it is well performed, but it's also, and I mentioned this stuff before, I like history being recorded in stories like this, because this is something that the Soviet Union did do. Not necessarily with Shakespeare, but where they would claim that certain technological achievements were in fact achieved by them first, and then the West stole it from them. This would be demonstrably false, but didn't matter. They needed to lay claim to the great things because it was necessary for them to validate their own government. That they always needed to claim superiority. Now, it's not to suggest that the U.S. government wasn't also doing that with some stuff, but there is also, ideally, I feel that the Western mentality is more accepting of others achieving various things, and we benefit from them, even though it's not our achievement, but still ultimately benefiting from it. I'm just trying to think what's actually a good example of that. Because I did think of one example, but that's not quite true. There's the assembly line thing. Technically, Germans figured that out, except it was Henry Ford who figured out how to do it on a mass scale, but he did not develop the assembly line. But to put it at the level that he did, no, he did do that. Yes, that would work. Rocketry stuff that we got after World War II and the capturing of various German scientists. It's like we don't need to claim that, no, we developed that stuff. It's like, no, we took it from them, both literally and figuratively. And it's like, yeah. But we then went on to build things like the Saturn V. I mean, it's like, yeah, we still, had our own achievements, but we did get it from somebody else. Which also reminds me of a line. I don't know if I will read that book at some point. I will get and read it. But in the movie, at least, Vice Station Zebra, you've got Patrick McGowan gives a line about how, the German scientists, the Americans captured, made the camera. The German scientists that the camera put into a satellite. The German scientists that made the Americans captured the German scientists and made the camera for the satellite. The German scientists that the British got made the special film that could be magnified infinite times, which I think would basically just mean it had very, very, very fine grain. And the German scientists that the Soviets captured were the ones that figured out how to launch it, because it was British made the film, Americans made the satellite, Soviets stole it and then put it in orbit. So it's like they all three of them only achieved what they were by the German scientists, and it is kind of a funny line, but it is also that was the thing. But it's still I do think that the Western mode of thinking is more accepting, and I could be wrong on this because I'm in the Western culture. Yeah, I'm probably biased here. That we are more accepting of, oh yeah, you came up with that thing. That's awesome. We want to use it too. But we're not neglecting that they came up with it. Okay, no. Let me correct that. We don't have an issue with them coming up with it. Our education, I will fully admit, sometimes, not so good, and we don't realize that, oh, they came up with that, and then we may start thinking that we originated when we didn't. Sorry. That will happen, but I don't think that we so often have propaganda to say that, no, we came up with something when somebody else did. It's just, we stopped teaching it. Anyway, moving on here. So this was, the original Shakespeare in the original Cleon is after the Hamlet Act 3 Scene 1 that he actually, that Gorkin actually quoted specifically. But then Spock's like, I don't understand this. That quote clearly refers to the fear of death about the undiscovered country. Gorkin leaned forward, enthusiastic about his subject. But do you not see that it is also a metaphor concerning fear of the unknown? Our people have been in what amounts to a state of undeclared war with your Federation for nearly 7 decades. And why? Because war, battle, is all we know. Because peace is something new, different, frightening to us. But we must be willing to embrace the fear and move forward into what awaits us, into the future. We must find a way to reconcile our warrior concepts of honor and glory with the concept of peaceful coexistence with other cultures. Otherwise, his expression darkened as he sat back, we will destroy ourselves. Spock nods thoughtfully at this, but shortly after this, we had Chang then saying, to be or not to be? That is the question which preoccupies our people, Captain Kirk. And even though this is... He glanced quickly in Gorkin's direction as if acknowledging a source of contention with the Chancellor. But it is... I like how they had that line right there, because it is very much telling you about both of their positions here. That, that Chang is afraid. He is concerned. He's a general. He's supposed to be. That those are his concerns. Gorkin, as I said, he's at a higher level. He has to think about these other options. He has to consider peace. The general doesn't have responsibility to consider peace. He just needs to consider war. So it is very interesting. And the note I actually put in concerning the dinner scene here is that I would describe this as about equal to what's in the movie. Because the movie has the advantage of being much shorter, and generally brevity is good. This, it is longer, and at times if it were up here, as far as like the energy, the interest, and all that, if it were up here, it would be better. It's not. It's more like here, but it still is interesting. Like down here, I'd be having fun, but no, it's like right here with what all's going on there, and I haven't gotten to some of what makes it particularly interesting, and especially something about Spock that I pulled out of it. I'm reading between the lines. Maybe I was putting it between lines as well, but we'll get to that. So Chang has his thing, and then he says, we need breathing room. Spock caught the reference, which he hoped was unintentional. The captain did as well, for he muttered, Earth, Germany, 1938. The brow over Chang's good eye rose. I beg your pardon. The line in the movie is actually Earth, Hitler, 1938. And is, in fact, I don't remember what the speech was. But as I recall, it was Hitler's answer as far as why he annexed Austria and the Sudetenland. That it was, we need breathing room. We are a growing and powerful people. We need this space. But oh boy, it's quite a line in the movie. And it is also funny. Even mentions here because then Curler jumps in and says something. I don't remember what, but it does actually say in there, like Spock, because Spock is technically we're following his view at this time. He's thinking maybe Curler was given the instructions, keep in control of Chang. Like when he goes off, when he starts going off, change the subject, which is kind of funny. And it's like, yeah, kind of needed. And by the way, I do want to mention one thing. At least based on the movie, Curler is not part of the conspiracy. Because he is seen at the end. I don't remember if we see him applauding, but he is present at the end, not being arrested, and seems to be as befuddled by what is going on as everyone else. So, yeah. Yeah, then we get quite a bit that, it is interesting. So, I don't have highlights there because it's I don't know what one thing to highlight. So you get some of the back and forths, like as it were, inalienable, human rights. Even these terms are racist. We get that there. With this back and forth between Klingons and the Enterprise crew. We also get some more energy here. It's like Scotty actually gets up. But there's also, they start fighting amongst themselves. Like Uhura and Bones especially are more four-piece. Chekhov and Scotty are less so. And are saying these things, and it gets heated. It gets heated. And Spock makes note of Gorkon is kind of just like leaning back and watching everything. He's not interfering. And I think Curler like says a little bit, but not much. And Chang maybe as well. But when Spock looks over at Kirk is also not intervening. He's not saying anything. But Spock either used the terms somber or sullen for Kirk's expression. And I feel like that's... I can understand why Spock wouldn't pick up on it. That he is inferring that Kirk is just lost in his own thoughts. Is just troubled by everything. But Kirk... I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. Gorkon has to operate at that very high level. Kirk doesn't have to, but you might be able to argue that Kirk is learning to be open to that level through this story, and that his exposure to Gorkon is helping that. But he is just resting back, and he's also potentially just listening, doing the exact same thing as Gorkon. But Spock isn't picking up on that. And that's kind of a character flaw to Spock, which is fine. That he is assuming Kirk's motivations. He's also making an assumption about Gorkon's, but it's easier to assume that Gorkon is trying to just pay attention to all this, take it all in, observe it all. Because by his nature, he must. Kirk has personal reasons to not. But I think it's fair that Kirk is also just watching and listening and paying attention to all this. Also doesn't help that all the humans are kind of drunk because of the Romulan ale. Excuse me. Which even Spock does take a sip of for Gorkon's toast because he knows I really have to. It would be inappropriate not to. And it's like, even though it's a sip, it's like, whoa. That was just a sip. Shit, Scotty's emptied his. It's like, oh no. Yeah, we do get Chekhov and Scotty, like, right, leave it to the politicians to muck it up and leave us defenseless, Scott is saying here, before Gorkon interrupts with a cough, and then we get the line of, well, I see we have a long way to go. And it's... Yeah, trying to check on some of this, because this section ends with, if Gorkon felt the same way, Spock wondered if he had totally misjudged the capacity of human beings for rational behavior for peaceful coexistence. If Gorkon felt the same way, their chances of attaining peace in the galaxy were remote indeed. I'm just altering that highlight to be a bit more clear there. Which, I understand Spock thinking that. However, if I continue with the assumption that Gorkon is operating up here, no, none of that bothered him. He was learning from it all and seeing that, there's apprehensions here. But I think it is entirely reasonable, even though, let me see if I can find the line. Okay. Yeah. Scotty, don't let them put words in your mouth, to her, because her has admitted that, we're not perfect. Don't let them put words in your mouth. I haven't served 30 years in the engine room of a starship to be accused of gunboat diplomacy. In any case, we know where this is leading, Brigadier Curler said to no one in particular, his eyes glittering from the effects of the ale. The annihilation of our culture. The Klingons will replace those on the lowest rung of the Federation employment ladder, taking menial jobs and performing them for lower pay. That's economics, Chekhov protested, not racism. Uhura gestured angrily with her goblet, but you have to admit it adds up to the same thing. And it's just, I do appreciate the annihilation of our culture. I think in the movie they might use species instead of culture. Which, it's, the Klingons value their culture very much. Now, true, different author, but Search for Spock, so clear on that. And it is, even though their culture, Klingon culture, would be radically different from the Federation, I think what we can, because Curler is getting in on this a little bit. Chang and Gorkon also definitely appear to be of different opinions. So Gorkon seeing the crew arguing like this, if he is willing to attribute some of that to the Romulan ale, there is no harm in anything that happened there. Because what he is seeing is, they're actually a lot like us. They are having this argument. They happen to be having it in front of us. Well, they're drunk, so... But it's like, they are having these same arguments that we are having. That's like, you know what? There is some similarity here. This isn't going to be easy. There's still a long way to go. But this is not a bad sign. This doesn't mean peace is impossible. It just means it's not going to be easy. Well, if it were easy, we would have already had it. But there is one thing that I think I made the argument somewhere else. I don't remember where, concerning Klingon culture, but I know I talked... Well, yeah, that would have been in Search for Spock. That the Federation technically has like a super culture kind of view, in that there would be Federation laws, but the very species and cultures underneath it, so long as they followed those laws, they're allowed to do whatever they want. They can be independent and have their own laws covering everything else. So that whole, the annihilation of our culture, like, you could counter with, well, what part of your culture? It's like, what do you mean? It's like, these are the things where, if you want to join the Federation, you just need to agree to these, 10 things, let's say. And that's it. If you agree to that, then, there's no conflict. You can be an equal member in the Federation as everyone else. Not a problem. That, and basically my point being that Klingon culture does seem to be a monoculture, or at least they treat it as that. The Federation technically is not. Even the term Federation exposes that it is not a monoculture. So, yeah, the Klingons could be under it without much issue, but if they keep seeing the Federation, and by the way, there's also mention, I think it is Uhura that points out that some of us are really upset because our media is telling us to be upset because of the recent massacres, recent incident at Kudao. I think it's Azad Burr who responds, our media too is not helping matters. It's just, if you don't understand, if the Klingons don't understand certain aspects of the Federation, like the whole that, no, you could technically join the Federation, as long as you follow these basic things, we're good. Your culture is fine. We have no interest in touching your culture. maybe changing some stuff that it's like, hey, you think it's okay to kill people? We don't. We kind of need you to change that one. And just like summarily kill people. It's like, yeah, that's gotta stop that, guys. Um. So yeah, I mean, it's but if you can manage that, hey, we're good. So yeah, it is interesting, and I'm interested in seeing how more of this goes, and I am definitely Dillard. You're continuing to make me happy. Please keep it up. Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else here to mention, or do I did not highlight much of the dinner conversation. I really didn't, because it was just I'd be tempted to highlight the whole thing, and I'm not reading all that aloud in these videos. But it is definitely interesting to see the arguments. But it is in the movie. They try to keep it Enterprise versus clans, just the back and forth like that. But in the book, it is more so like Ezebur and Kurgler on the clan side, and then the crew. But the crew is also going against each other. They're not just going there. So it is interesting. But I think it's not necessarily a good thing. But as I said, I don't think it needs to be a bad thing. That Gorkon is potentially able to see this and recognize, yeah, it's not going to be easy. I knew it wouldn't be easy. But it's also, it's like, look at what's happening. It's like Kirk or Spock making an apology, and Kirk does want to make an apology. It's about, I'm so sorry for how they behaved. And it's like, Gorkon could even, I mean, he wouldn't be able to. Technically, he would not be able to say it, but he could have that admission of, what are you apologizing for? Well, for how they behaved at the table. Well, in front of you, it's like, yes, they behaved that way in front of me. Even a week ago. Would you believe that was possible? That they could be at the same table as me? Well, no, it's, yes, exactly. That's still progress. There's more to do. But look at this progress. We're at this table. So it is like you still got that achievement. There's more to go, but this is still a significant achievement. So yeah. You know what? I'll also add this. Okay, well, two things. One, we do know, because of how it was said there was Kirk's interpretation, that Gorkon listens to Chang. But don't forget, Gorkon requested it be it be Kirk and the Enterprise that escort them. So it's also possible that he expected something like this to happen. That's fine. And so it's like, he was also trying to learn things there. Okay. Oh, that's what that is. Okay. Sorry, just a smartwatch telling me about something. It's like, why is that there? Wait, no, it is. Oh, it's probably for that. Okay. Just trying to figure out why I got that email on that address, but no, I know why. I know why. But yeah, so anyway. Yeah. I am happy. Looking forward to Chapter 4, which will have, presumably, especially because Chapter 3 does end with, Kirk thought that that was the end of the events for the evening. It's like, well, no. So we're going to get the attack on Kronos 1 and all that. And I am definitely curious because it's the first known move by the conspirators. So, does Valeris know that Burke and Samno are involved? Do they not know? Have they been activated somehow at this point in time? Or is it something else? Don't know. And we might never know. It might not be written out explicitly. It might be something you have to piece together later on. But yeah, we shall see. We shall see. And I am curious to find out. See you next time.